Welcome everyone. Today we're going to be taking a quick look at form tiles. Form tiles are going to allow you to place a form on a dashboard so that end users can interact with decisions in a more direct way. We're going to show two use cases here, how they are built, and an overarching review of form tiles broadly. You'll see on this dashboard here I have two form tiles set up along the top. The first on the left is going to allow the end user to create a new case entity, a customer contract entry, a customer contact entry. The second on the right is going to allow the end user to update fields of the previously created contact entry. You'll notice that those changes are reflected in the report live. Before we look under the hood, let's start with a quick demonstration of the two features. You'll notice that once I hit submit, the report is updated to show the name and the contact date, which is the current date and time. You'll notice on the upper right, I'm now given that James Roberts as an option. When I click James Roberts, it'll auto-populate the email. We'll give it just a few moments. And hopefully when I click, it will say 454 along the bottom. So again, the form tile on the upper left allows you to create entries, and the form tile on the right is going to allow us to edit those. So let's take a look at how they are built in an overview of form tiles. Form tiles are going to be created and configured on a page. So here I am in the page designer. You can find a form tile by searching for it in the toolbox. Drag and drop it over, and you'll be given options for the form itself, for an input flow to populate the form, and an output flow to deal with the data that that form provides you. Let's start by taking a look at the form. On the form here, I've created two text boxes, one with the data name of name and one with the data name of email. Now traditionally, a form is going to live in a flow. Prior to the form in the flow, you will utilize steps to populate that information. However, with form tiles, there's a whole flow that you can utilize to populate information for the inputs, as well as an entire flow that you can utilize to deal with the data that comes out of your form. So once again, you'll notice here that the data names are email and name. When you provide those data names on the form, the input flow will have those as variables on your output step. So you can imagine that the form kind of lives on this red end step. You can utilize a fetch entities, and we will show that with the other form tile or some other logic to provide data for that form to pre-populate it. But for now, we just left it blank. Now the output flow is where we're going to take that data from the form and perform actions. We chose to use a create step, and this is a user-defined type, new customer entity, and it is a case entity. I am given in my output flow what would be outputs from my form. So they are found in the select from flow option, email, and name. Those are available for you by default. For contact date, I just put current date and time. I then filled out a little bit more information about the case entity itself. I then used a step called send refresh report by folder event, and this is going to allow those reports on the dashboard to stay current with what the form tile is providing. We will talk about the implementation of this when we talk about dashboards here in a few moments. So that's the first use case of form tiles. Let's talk about the second one that is going to be a little bit more robust because it is using an input flow to populate data. So once again, a form tile is going to start with the form itself. Any inputs that you provide for this form are going to show up on the red end step of the input flow. So I chose to pass in a list of new customer entities so that I can populate the name display field for this dropdown. This email is going to be pre-populated using an active form flow. Here it is, populate email. Anytime the name dropdown is changed, it will run this flow where we are setting the control value and we're showing multiple controls. So let's take a look at the input to this form. When I click on the input flow, you'll see that I simply have a fetch entities, and I'm fetching all new customer entities. From there, I can take those entity results and pass it in as the input entity, list of new customer entity. I'm not going to populate email because that can be populated dynamically with entity results. In the name dropdown, we are not pre-selecting an option, so we're going to leave that to ignore as well. And again, all of this comes from inputs of the form itself. So we fetch the entities, it comes through, and it's going to hit that form and populate it for us. Once a selection is made, it will go to the output. And for here, we chose to do a selective update. Because we were passing in the entire case entity, we can simply map in the extension ID for extension ID and just update the fields we want. And all we want to update here is the contact date, so that when they click that button, it will contact them. We will then once again refresh the reports. The send email is going to be the customer contact itself, and then we have a show pop-up to validate that that has been worked. All right, so let's go back and take a look at the dashboard and look at its implementation. And to show how this works, we're going to utilize the Global Debugger. I can turn that on in the bottom left under Tools, Show Global Debugger. I'm going to turn it on. Now, when I run those forms, I can pop back over and look at this and see how all of those flows and forms ran. So let's start with the new customer contact. I can enter in information here, name and email. And when I hit submit, let's take a look at the Global Debugger. You'll notice in the Global Debugger that the input flow is run and the output flow is run. When I go to this create new customer entity and look at the inputs and outputs, it populates data from the form itself. And it takes the current date and time as the contact date. It then sends a refresh report by folder event. It utilizes the folder ID of the dashboard itself. You can easily find that in the URL bar, as shown in the screenshot here. We mapped it in as a constant for the send refresh by folder event in the flow. The send follow-up email is going to work in the same way. Let's take a look at it through the lens of that Global Debugger. I can select a name, and I'm going to select one from much earlier in the day so we can see how it happens. We got James Johnson here at 2:18. When I hit submit, that information refreshes and we pop over to the Global Debugger. We will now be given that new information. The fetch entities runs. It populates the form with that data. The form is filled out. And then all of that information is run through. Selective update. And again, all we're mapping in is the contact date, which is the current date and time. We're using the extension ID to identify which user we want to update. We're sending a refresh, we're sending an email, and we're showing a pop-up to notify the user that it completed successfully. Let's take a look at one more use case and another strength of form tiles, and that is that they are page context aware. So what do I mean by that? I mean that as we go through and fill out this form, we can utilize steps to change the report that lives on this page only. So you might have a dashboard that has a number of pages on it, and the form tile knows what page it is on. So how does that look behind the scenes? So as we build out our page context aware dashboard, we have a report. On this report, we have a filter that is a equals filter. So it is for the department field, and it equals, and then we have get values from other reports, which allows us to utilize this as a named variable, which we called capital DEPT, short for department. On our form tile, we have an active form flow that is used to kind of target the report that is on that page. So you can see that here. So that we have an active form flow, filter dashboards, anytime the radio button selection is changed. We're using a step called set report parameters. The report parameter that we are trying to set is that capital DEPT, right? Just like the filter that we kind of show in the previous screen. And then we say, okay, well, what are we getting that data from the radio button selection list, the selected item, and what is the folder ID that we are going to be using to set that report dashboard. Now, where does this folder ID come from? This folder ID is going to come from the folder ID of the page itself. So as I kind of close out of all these, I'll kind of have it pop up right here on the screen. This is the folder ID that we utilized in this active form flow. So when we go back in here, again, kind of walking through how I set this up. I did a fetch entities on the account, and I didn't want a bunch of the same list of department when I made that input here. So I put a get distinct list of strings, which kind of removes duplicates and only finds unique values. Once those unique values are kind of found, it will be used to populate the department inputs. So as you add new departments in your account decisions framework structure, it will show up as a new option on the form tiles. And then on the output flow, I use the button from the form itself to set that department to null so that it shows all values. So again, you can kind of see how this maybe runs in the background here. When I click on one of these, it sends support to that department filter. It sends documentation to that department filter, training to that department filter, or null to that department filter. So again, with that page context aware, it knows that this report lives here. So as I go to documentation and I look at my duplicate report, it didn't filter that one at all. So in review, form tiles are going to be a great way for your end users to interact with decisions. Anything you can do in a flow or with a form, you can perform with the form tiles live on a dashboard. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to training@decisions.com or support@decisions.com. Thank you.